The night was thick with heat, the kind that clung to the skin and turned every breath into a struggle. Deep in the mountains of a country no one would ever admit they were operating in, a team of Navy SEALs lay pressed against the rocky earth. Their camouflage blended into the terrain, but the nervous thud of their hearts beat louder than the chirping insects around them. Captain Jace Warren, the team leader, adjusted the night vision goggles on his face, green light casting the world in shades of shadow and eerie glow. Their mission had been straightforward on paper: sabotage an enemy weapons depot tucked inside a fortified valley, but the moment they breached the perimeter, everything unraveled into chaos. What was supposed to be a hidden outpost turned out to be a stronghold crawling with militants, and every escape route the SEALs had mapped was now blocked by machine gun nests and armored trucks rolling into position. Pinned down behind shattered stone walls, the SEALs fought to return fire, the sharp cracks of suppressed rifles swallowed by the roar of heavy weapons pounding the valley floor. Sparks danced from rocks as rounds smacked into their cover. Warren's comms buzzed with the panicked voice of Petty Officer Mason. "We can't hold this much longer, boss. They're flanking us from the ridge." Warren already knew it. He peeked around the edge and caught sight of muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness from above. They were being herded into a kill box. If they stayed, they'd be overrun. If they moved, they'd be cut down in the open. The only option left was the one command never wanted them to use: call in an airstrike practically on top of themselves. Warren pressed his comms button hard, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Overlord, this is Phantom 6. We need immediate air support. Coordinates uploading now. Priority red." He transmitted the data, his thumb hesitating for just a heartbeat as he realized what he was asking: steel rain to fall so close it might take his own team out with it. The response came after a pause filled only with gunfire and the desperate breathing of his men. "Phantom 6, copy coordinates. Angel 3 inbound ETA 3 minutes. Warren exhaled, a flicker of relief passing across his dirt-streaked face. He didn't know the pilot by name, only that some unknown call sign in the sky now held their lives in his hands. Those 3 minutes stretched into an eternity. The enemy fighters pressed harder, shouts echoing in a language none of the SEALs understood but didn't need to. They could read intent in the way the gunfire grew closer, the way figures began darting between rocks, closing the distance. Grenades thudded into the dirt, spraying shrapnel. One of Warren's men, Ortiz, cried out as a shard tore through his thigh, and 2 others dragged him behind thicker cover while he cursed through clenched teeth. Warren glanced up at the starless sky, whispering under his breath, "Come on, Angel 3, get your ass here." Then came the distant rumble. Low at first, like the growl of a storm far away, then rising until the very rocks seemed to vibrate. The team looked up and spotted the faint silhouette of a jet screaming across the heavens, cutting through the night with impossible speed. The enemy fighters noticed too. There was a moment's pause, a shift in their aggression, as if they realized something worse than the SEALs' rifles was about to descend upon them. Warren's radio hissed with the voice of the pilot, calm, almost casual. "Phantom 6, Angel 3 on station. Confirm you want the hammer dropped. Danger close." Warren swallowed hard. Danger close was an understatement, it was suicide range bombing. But he had no choice. "Angel 3, drop it. Paint the valley." The pilot didn't hesitate. The jet tilted, banking into a dive, and Warren could hear the distant shriek of the engines straining against gravity. Then came the blinding streaks of ordnance unleashed from under the wings, fiery tails carving across the night sky. A second later, the valley exploded. The earth shook violently as walls of fire and thunder consumed the enemy positions. Shockwaves ripped through the SEALs' bones, the overpressure slamming into their chests. Mountains echoed with rolling detonations as men screamed and weapons clattered uselessly to the ground. Dust and fire swallowed the valley whole. When the inferno dimmed and the echoes faded, the SEALs raised their heads cautiously. Where enemy fighters had once been advancing, there was now nothing but craters, smoke and burning wreckage. The few survivors were staggering shadows, disoriented and broken, easy pickings if they even tried to continue the fight. For a moment the SEALs simply breathed, alive against all odds. Ortiz, clutching his bleeding leg, muttered, "Holy hell, that's one way to clear the board." But it wasn't over. Warren glanced skyward, tracking the jet. Instead of pulling away, the pilot had stayed low, impossibly low, skimming just above the valley rim. And then something happened none of them expected. As the jet roared overhead, the canopy blasted free with a sharp detonation, and the figure of the pilot was launched skyward. A chute didn't deploy, not yet. Instead, the pilot twisted midair, steady and deliberate despite the chaos, and dropped into a free fall directly above the burning battlefield. For a heartbeat it seemed insane. Why would a pilot eject here, above the very target he just turned into an inferno? The SEALs stared, their eyes wide behind night vision lenses, as the pilot raised a hand to his helmet, fingers pressed against the forehead in a crisp salute. The gesture was unmistakable, surreal against the backdrop of smoke and ruin. He was saluting them. Saluting the men on the ground he'd just saved, as if acknowledging their fight, their desperation, their survival. The SEALs, hardened warriors who rarely let emotion crack their facades, sat frozen in awe. The pilot tumbled gracefully through the sky, hand still briefly to his brow before snapping it down, body twisting into perfect form as a shoot finally blossomed above him. The glowing canopy bloomed against the smoke-choked stars, carrying him down into the same hell he'd just scorched clean. Warren felt his throat tighten. He didn't know who that man was, didn't know why he'd ejected into hostile terrain when he could have flown home victorious. But the image burned into his memory. A lone warrior in the sky, saluting those below as if to say they weren't alone, as if to remind them that even in the darkest missions, someone still believed in honor. The SEALs, battered and bloodied, found themselves rising to their knees, some even returning the salute instinctively, rifles resting across their shoulders. For that single suspended moment, amidst the destruction, there was no fear, only respect, awe, and the shared bond of men who knew they had looked death in the eye and lived because another had chosen to fall with them. The parachute drifted slowly through the smoke-filled sky, glowing faintly as stray embers rose to meet it. The SEALs tracked the descent with tense eyes, their rifles shifting automatically to cover the ridges in case any of the surviving militants tried to regroup. The valley was quiet now, but quiet never lasted long in a place like this. Captain Warren's heart pounded as he followed the pilot's silhouette spiraling downward, landing far too close to the edges where enemy shadows might still linger. "We move," Warren ordered, voice tight. "He bought us. Time now we pay it back. Form up, cover arcs." No one argued. Despite their wounds, exhaustion, and disbelief, the SEALs pushed forward, cutting across the scorched battlefield littered with twisted metal and charred bodies. The air stank of burning fuel and blood. Every step crunched on fragments of stone and spent brass. Petty Officer Mason glanced upward again, muttering, "Who the hell jumps into a hot zone on purpose?" Ortiz, limping with the help of Doc Harlow, gritted his teeth and said, "The kind of man who doesn't plan on leaving you behind." Warren didn't answer, though the thought echoed in his mind. Whoever this Angel 3 was, he wasn't following any standard protocol. Ejecting over enemy ground meant certain capture, or worse, unless you were insane, fearless, or carrying a plan no one else could guess. Warren clenched his jaw, forcing his team to move faster. The chute had drifted toward the northern slope of the valley, and as the fabric finally collapsed against the rocks, the pilot landed hard, rolling with practiced precision before coming to a stop near a shattered boulder. He ripped off his helmet, revealing a face smeared with soot, young but hard-edged, with eyes burning the same intensity they'd heard in his calm voice over comms. He didn't look like a man who had just bailed out of the sky. He looked like he'd meant to. The SEALs arrived just as the pilot unclipped his harness. He stood tall, brushing dust from his flight suit, and raised two fingers in a casual salute toward Warren, who was still processing what he was seeing. "Name's Callahan," the pilot said, his tone brisk but steady. "Angel 3. Guess introductions are a little overdue." Warren stared at him. "You jumped into a valley crawling with hostiles. You planning on telling me why?" Callahan smirked faintly, the kind of smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Orders were simple, keep you boys alive. You weren't walking out without help. Figured it was time to get personal." Before Warren could press for more, gunfire cracked from the ridge above. The militants hadn't been wiped out completely, they'd regrouped, and now they were pouring fire into the valley once more. Bullets hissed into the ground near the SEALs, ricocheting off rocks. "Contact north slope," Mason shouted, dropping to one knee and sending a burst toward the muzzle flashes. Callahan didn't flinch. In one smooth motion, he drew a sidearm from his thigh holster and began firing with crisp precision, his shots picking off figures in the darkness like he'd done this 100 times before. The SEALs fell into formation around him, laying down controlled fire, and for a moment, it felt as though the stranger had always been part of the team. But the enemy was still closing, and Warren knew they couldn't survive another prolonged firefight in the open. He keyed his comms again, hoping for some miracle. "Overlord, this is Phantom 6. Angel 3 is down here with us. We need immediate extraction, hot zone priority." Static filled the channel for a long, dreadful second before the controller's voice replied, strained. Phantom 6, Overlord copies. Nearest bird is 20 minutes out. Hold position until then. Warren cursed under his breath. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 years. They had to move or they'd be buried here. Callahan seemed to read Warren's mind. He holstered his pistol, crouching low beside the captain. There's a cave system at the base of that ridge, he said, pointing through the haze. I saw it on recon weeks ago. It's defensible. If we can get inside, we buy ourselves enough time until your ride arrives. Warren studied him, suspicion warring with instinct. But there was no better option, and the SEALs didn't hesitate when he gave the order. They bounded from cover to cover, laying suppressive fire while Callahan led the way across the smoking ground. Enemy rounds snapped around them, but the team moved like a machine, pulling each other forward, Ortiz grunting with every step as Harlow half-dragged him along. The entrance to the cave was narrow, almost invisible in the rock face, but it swallowed them one by one until the entire team slipped inside, darkness consuming them. Warren ordered his men to fan out, weapons trained on the jagged opening. The echoes of gunfire outside grew distant, muffled by stone. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was a flicker of safety. Callahan leaned against the wall, breathing hard, his face glistening with sweat. He looked at Warren and said quietly, "You're wondering why I stayed. Why I jumped." Warren didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Callahan's expression hardened. "Because command wrote you off. They said it was impossible to get you out. But I don't leave people to die on a piece of paper. Not then, not ever." The words hit harder than any explosion. Warren's stomach turned as he realized what Callahan meant. Somewhere, back at a command center, some faceless superior had already consigned Phantom 6 to the list of acceptable losses. The airstrike had been greenlit not to save them, but to cover the evidence of their destruction. The pilot who'd saluted in Freefall wasn't just honoring them, he was defying the very orders meant to erase them. Warren's men exchanged looks in the dim light, the weight of betrayal pressing heavy on their shoulders. Ortiz spat on the ground, muttering, "Figures. We're just pawns to them." Before the silence could thicken further, a loud thud echoed from the valley mouth, followed by the shouts of militants closing in on the cave. They had been tracked. Warren snapped back into focus, rallying his men. "Positions. Lock this down. We hold until the bird gets here." Rifles clicked, magazines slammed home, and in the flickering light of muzzle flashes, the SEALs braced themselves once again for the storm. Callahan drew his pistol and knife, his jaw set with grim determination. Whatever else he was theirs now, one of them trapped in the same crucible, bound by the same fight. The first wave of enemies surged into view, silhouetted in the cave entrance. The SEALs unleashed a torrent of fire, the confined space amplifying every shot into deafening thunder. Grenades thumped, smoke choked the air, and bodies fell one after another, but the tide kept pressing. Warren fought with everything he had, blood splattering his face as he reloaded, shouting over the chaos. Callahan moved like a ghost, sliding between cover, his shots impossibly precise, his knife flashing in the dim glow when enemies pressed too close. The cave became a furnace of noise and fury, but the team held. They had no choice. Minutes bled into eternity. At last, above the gunfire, the distant thump of helicopter blades began to echo through the valley. Warren's chest heaved with relief, but the fight wasn't done yet. The enemy knew too. They surged harder, desperate to finish the kill before the SEALs could escape. Warren's men roared back, every trigger squeeze fueled by defiance. Through the haze, Callahan caught Warren's eye, giving a sharp nod as if to say, "Almost there, hold the line." And somehow in that moment, Warren believed they could. The thundering beat of rotor blades grew louder, rolling across the valley like a promise of salvation. The SEALs, choking on dust and gunpowder, pushed harder against the relentless tide of fighters trying to storm the cave. Every burst of rifle fire lit the shadows like lightning, every scream of pain echoed off the jagged stone. Warren's throat burned from shouting commands, his shoulder throbbed from recoil, but he kept firing, forcing himself to stay sharp. The helicopter was closing, but closing wasn't the same as safe. They still had to fight their way out, wounded and weary, with enemies swarming from every angle. "Keep that entrance locked down," Warren bellowed. "No one slips through." Callahan stood beside him, eyes blazing in the flicker of muzzle flashes. He didn't flinch as rounds ricocheted off the stone, didn't hesitate when his pistol clicked empty. Instead, he smoothly drew another magazine, slammed it home, and kept firing with surgical precision. He fought like a man who had already decided his fate, as though each shot wasn't for survival but for honor. Warren noticed it, the grim set of his jaw, the way he positioned himself slightly ahead of the team, taking fire that could have cut them down. He was making himself a shield. The cave echoed with the hiss of incoming RPG fire. Incoming! Mason shouted, diving flat as a rocket slammed into the rock face just outside. The explosion rocked the ground, spraying shards of stone across the seals. Dust clouded the air, and Ortiz cried out again as a jagged fragment tore deeper into his wounded leg. Harlow dragged him back, blood slick on his gloves. "He's fading fast, Cap," the medic yelled. Warren clenched his teeth. They couldn't hold here much longer, not with RPGs pounding their position. The helicopter would have to land under fire, or they'd be trapped until the mountain came down around them. Phantom 6, this is Overlord. Extraction bird on final approach. 60 seconds out. The voice crackled over comms, distorted by static, but it was enough to spark fresh energy into the SEALs. 60 seconds. Just one more brutal minute to endure. We hold until wheels down. Warren roared, his voice raw. Nobody quits, nobody falls. The men responded with a ragged chorus of acknowledgments, some shouted, some muttered through clenched jaws. They tightened their grips, braced against the onslaught, and unleashed everything left in them. The militants outside screamed as they pressed harder, bullets hammering the cave entrance, grenades bouncing inside before the SEALs kicked them back out in desperate bursts. Callahan darted forward, scooping up a live grenade and hurling it back with a grunt, the blast shaking the night. He didn't even look at the danger. His eyes were fixed on Warren. "When that bird touches down, you take your men and run," he barked. "No hesitation. Get them out." Warren fired a burst into the smoke, glaring at him. "That means you too, Callahan. You hear me? You didn't fall out of the damn sky just to stay buried here." Callahan's lips curved in the faintest smirk. "We'll see." The pounding of rotor blades grew deafening, echoing across the valley walls. Dust swirled into a storm as the helicopter dropped low, its side guns opening fire to shred enemy positions. Tracers stitched across the ridge, cutting down militants in droves. Warren could feel the ground shaking beneath his boots, the chaos outside reaching its fever pitch. "Move," he shouted. "We push to the bird now." The SEALs surged from the cave in a burst of fire and fury, rifles blazing as they charged into the open. The helicopter hovered barely 30 feet off the ground, its side door yawning open, crewmen waving frantically for them to hurry. Enemy fighters fired from every direction, but the SEALs carved a bloody path through them, their movements fueled by desperation and raw willpower. Mason laid down suppressive bursts while Ortiz was half carried by Harlow, blood soaking the earth with every step. Bullets whipped past their heads, some so close they tore fabric and skin, but the team didn't break. Warren turned back once, covering the rear with Callahan at his side. The pilot fought like a demon, knife flashing as he gutted one man who had lunged too close, then snapping off shots that dropped two more before they even knew he'd moved. The helicopter crew's gunner raked the ground with heavy fire, tearing enemy fighters apart in sprays of dirt and smoke. "Get on the bird," Warren bellowed, shoving his men forward. One by one they leapt into the bay, dragged by waiting arms. Ortiz screamed in agony as he was hauled aboard, his blood smearing across the deck, but he was alive. Callahan shoved Warren hard toward the helicopter. "Go," he barked. Warren spun back. "Not without you." Callahan's expression hardened, the faintest flicker of sorrow in his eyes. "Somebody has to keep them off your tail." Before Warren could argue, Callahan sprinted sideways, drawing fire away from the bird, his pistol barking in rapid bursts. The militants turned their attention to him like moths to flame. He dove behind wreckage, then popped up again, taking down 3 men before vanishing into smoke. Warren's chest tightened with rage and disbelief. "Callahan!" he roared, straining against the arms of his men who pulled him aboard. The helicopter lifted, engines screaming as it strained against the weight and the hail of bullets. Warren stood in the open doorway, firing into the valley below, his eyes scanning frantically for the lone figure who had saluted them in freefall. Through the chaos, he glimpsed him, Callahan, standing tall on the burning ground, reloading with calm precision even as dozens closed around him. He looked up at the helicopter as it rose, and once again, impossibly, he raised his hand in a crisp salute. Warren felt something tear in his chest. He snapped his own hand up, returning it, even as tears blurred his vision. The bird banked hard, pulling away from the valley. The last thing Warren saw was Callahan swallowed by fire and smoke, still standing, still defiant. Then the mountain walls closed off the view and he was gone. Inside the helicopter, Silence fell except for the thrum of rotors and the labored breaths of men who had given everything. Ortiz drifted in and out of consciousness, Harlow working furiously to keep him alive. Mason sat with his head bowed, rifle across his lap, muttering prayers under his breath. Warren stood near the open door, staring into the night where they'd left Callahan behind. His fists clenched until his knuckles bled. He had lost men before, but never like this. Not someone who had chosen to fall from the sky, to stand in the fire, to carry their survival on his shoulders. He knew deep down that Angel 3 had never expected to leave. That jump, that salute, it had always been a farewell. The comms crackled in Warren's ear. Phantom 6, this is Overlord. Confirm all units aboard. Warren's voice was like gravel when he replied. Negative. One still on the ground. Angel 3 stayed behind. There was a pause, then Overlord's clipped response. Acknowledged. Proceed to base. Warren ripped the headset off, hurling it against the wall. He slumped onto the bench beside his men, the weight of guilt crushing him. But even through the grief, a spark remained, a memory of that salute, a silent vow that this sacrifice would not be forgotten. As the helicopter carried them into the night, Warren whispered to himself, too soft for anyone else to hear, "You didn't fall for nothing, brother. Not while I breathe." The helicopter thundered across the night sky, its engines groaning under the weight of battered men and heavy silence. Inside the dimly lit bay, the SEALs sat slumped against the steel walls, each lost in their own thoughts, their faces streaked with grime and exhaustion. No one spoke, not even Mason, who was usually the first to crack a joke. To cut tension. The adrenaline had burned out, leaving only emptiness. Ortiz drifted on the edge of consciousness, his blood pooling dark beneath him despite Harlow's frantic work. The medic's gloves were soaked, his face pale but determined, whispering steady words to keep Ortiz tethered to life. Warren stood near the open door, the cold night wind whipping his face, eyes locked on the void outside. He couldn't shake the image of Callahan standing alone in that burning valley, hand raised in salute, swallowed by the firestorm. The pilot up front shouted back over the roar of the rotors. "Idiot, 10 minutes to forward base." His voice was steady, but Warren caught the edge of unease in it. Everyone in the cockpit had seen the chaos in that valley, had heard the clipped tone in Warren's voice when he reported Callahan had stayed behind. The crew didn't ask questions, but the silence weighed heavier than any interrogation. Warren finally tore himself away from the door, crouching beside Harlow. "How is he?" he asked. Harlow didn't look up, his jaw clenched tight. "Bad. Shrapnel tore through his femoral. I've slowed the bleeding, but he needs a surgeon now or he's gone." Warren pressed a hand to Ortiz's shoulder, gripping tight. "Stay with us, soldier. You're not checking out tonight." Ortiz's eyelids fluttered, but he managed a weak grin. "Don't plan on it, Cap." The helicopter dipped, banking sharply as the forward operating base came into view below. Floodlights stabbed into the night, illuminating the landing zone where medics and security teams waited. The bird touched down hard, skids scraping the dirt, and the back ramp slammed open. The SEALs disembarked quickly, some half-carrying Ortiz, others scanning the perimeter despite the relative safety. Warren was the last to step off, his boots sinking into the dust of the landing pad, his body heavy but his mind racing. Medics rushed Ortiz onto a stretcher and whisked him away, Harlow following close behind, barking medical jargon. Warren turned to watch them vanish into the brightly lit hangar, a knot tightening in his gut. Then a figure approached, a colonel in pressed fatigues, flanked by aides with clipboards. His expression was unreadable, but Warren recognized the type. Command brass, more comfortable behind a desk than in a firefight. "Captain Warren," the colonel said, his voice clipped. "Debrief in 5 minutes. Your team will be decontaminated and secured for rest." Warren's jaw clenched. He wanted to refuse, to shove past and find his men, but the colonel's tone made clear it wasn't a request. The brass wanted answers and they wanted them now. Warren nodded stiffly. "Understood." The debriefing room was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the hell they'd just crawled out of. Warren sat at the head of the table, still streaked with soot and blood, while Mason and the others lined the seats beside him. The colonel and his aides stood at the far end, eyes sharp, pens ready. "Begin from the breach," the colonel ordered. Warren recounted everything in precise detail. The faulty intel, the overwhelming enemy force, the desperate call for an airstrike, the arrival of Angel 3. He spoke of the bombs that tore the valley apart, of the miraculous appearance of the pilot on the ground, of his guidance into the caves and his final stand during extraction. Every word felt like a blade carving deeper into Warren's chest, but he refused to falter. When he finished, silence filled the room, broken only by the scratch of pens. Finally the colonel spoke. "You are certain he ejected of his own accord? That he engaged with you willingly?" Warren's eyes narrowed. "I'm certain. He fought beside us. He saved us." The colonel exchanged a glance with one of his aides before replying. Captain Callahan was not authorized for ground combat. His orders were to provide air support only. His decision to disobey protocol compromised operational integrity. Mason slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing like gunfire. "Compromised? The man saved our lives. You'd rather we'd all died neatly so your reports looked cleaner?" Warren shot him a warning glance, but his own anger simmered beneath the surface. The colonel's face remained cold. "His fate is unknown. We cannot commit resources to retrieval at this time. For official purposes, Angel 3 will be listed as missing in action." Warren rose from his chair, his shadow looming across the table. "Missing in action?" He stood his ground against an army to buy us a chance. He didn't go missing, he made a choice. And you're telling me you'll bury that with paperwork? The aides shifted uncomfortably, but the colonel's gaze didn't waver. "This discussion is closed." Dismissed. The SEALs left the room in silence, fury and disbelief etched into their faces. Outside, under the harsh lights of the base, Warren finally allowed the mask to crack. He paced, fists tight, his mind replaying every moment of Callahan's fall. Mason lit a cigarette with shaking hands, exhaling hard. "They'll erase him, Cap. Just scrub him out of the record like he never existed." Warren stopped pacing, his eyes burning with resolve. "Not while I'm breathing. If command won't honor him, we will." Later, in the dim barracks, the team gathered around a battered metal table. The room reeked of sweat and antiseptic, Ortiz asleep in the infirmary down the hall. Warren laid Callahan's helmet on the table. He'd picked it up in the chaos without realizing. The visor was cracked, the surface scorched, but it was all they had left of the man who had fallen from the sky for them. The SEALs sat in silence, the weight of it pressing down like stone. Finally Warren spoke, his voice low but steady. "We don't let this die here. We tell it. Every detail, every breath. People will know who he was and what he did. That's how we keep him alive." Mason nodded, his usual sarcasm stripped away. "Damn right. If they won't put his name in the books, we'll carve it into the walls ourselves." Harlow, exhausted but resolute, murmured. "He saluted us, Cap. Like we were brothers already. I'm not letting that vanish into some classified file." Warren placed a hand on the cracked helmet, his reflection warped in its surface. Then it settled. "Angel 3 isn't gone. He's ours now. And until the day we stop breathing, his story doesn't end." The days after their return blurred into a haze of medical checkups, forced rest cycles and silence. The SEALs were used to hard missions, to losing men, but this was different. Callahan wasn't one of theirs, not officially, yet his absence carved into them as sharply as if he'd worn the same patch on his shoulder. Every night, Warren lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, the whir of the base's ventilation sounding like the echo of distant rotor blades. The memory of Callahan's salute replayed over and over, branded into his mind. It wasn't just a farewell, it was a demand. "Don't let them forget me. Don't let them erase this." Ortiz survived surgery barely. He was pale and weak, but alive, and whenever Warren visited him in the infirmary, Ortiz would rasp out the same words. "We owe him, Cap. We can't let this slide." Warren would nod, gripping his soldier's shoulder, feeling the weight of those words pressing heavier each time. He knew Ortiz was right, but command had already locked down the files. Their official report came back sanitized, stripped of Callahan's name. The pilot's heroism was reduced to support assets, his decision to eject omitted entirely. The man who had fallen from the sky to save them had been erased with a stroke of a pen. Mason was the first to crack under the strain. One night, in the barracks, he slammed a chair against the wall, splintering the backrest, his voice hoarse with rage. "They buried him like he was nothing. We're just supposed to swallow that? Pretend he didn't stand there alone while we flew off?" Harlow grabbed him by the arm, pulling him back before he tore the room apart. "Calm down, Mason." But Mason's eyes were wild. "No. Screw that. Calm won't bring him back. Calm won't put his name where it belongs." Warren watched from his bunk, silent, letting Mason burn out. He understood. He felt the same fury simmering under his skin. The next morning, Warren requested a meeting with the colonel again. He was kept waiting an hour before being ushered into the office, where the man sat behind a wide desk littered with folders. "Captain Warren," the colonel said, his tone cool. I trust your men are recovering. Warren didn't sit. Why are we erasing Callahan? The colonel's pen stilled. This subject is closed. Warren stepped closer, his voice sharpening. He disobeyed protocol, yes. But he did it to save lives. My team is alive because of him. That matters. The colonel leaned back, expression flat. What matters is operational security. His actions were unsanctioned. Acknowledging them would raise questions we cannot afford. Warren's fists clenched. So that's it? A man gives everything, and you bury him because it's inconvenient. The colonel's gaze turned icy. Watch your tone, Captain. You're alive to argue only because command greenlit that strike in the first place. Don't mistake sentiment for authority. The words landed like a slap, but Warren refused to flinch. He leaned over the desk, his voice low and dangerous. I don't care about your authority. I care about the man who stood in fire so we could walk out. You can bury his name in your files, but you'll never bury it in us. He walked out before the colonel could reply, the door slamming hard enough to rattle the walls. Outside, Mason was waiting, a knowing smirk on his face. So I'm guessing that went well? Warren's silence was answer enough. Mason's smirk faded, replaced by resolve. Then we do it our way. That night, the SEALs gathered again around the battered helmet, the last piece of Callahan they had. Warren laid out the plan in a low voice. They'll never put him in the books. Fine. Then we tell it ourselves. We keep it alive. Every bar we walk into, every rookie who joins the teams, every soul willing to listen, we tell them what Angel 3 did. Mason leaned forward, eyes burning. We make him a ghost story. The kind whispered around fire pits. The pilot who fell from the sky, saluted in the fire, and stood alone against an army. They can't erase that. Harlow nodded slowly. And maybe one day someone who matters hears it. Maybe it forces the truth out. But even as they spoke, Warren knew words weren't enough. The image of Callahan alone in the valley haunted him, demanding more than stories. He began digging quietly, pulling strings through old contacts, searching for Callahan's records. The more he dug, the stranger it became. Files were redacted beyond reason, entire missions blacked out. Callahan's name appeared only in fragments, training reports, a commendation that had been rescinded without explanation, transfer papers that led nowhere. It was as though someone had deliberately erased his trail long before the valley. One night, Warren found Mason hunched over a laptop, face lit by the glow of classified documents he'd hacked through less than legal means. Mason looked up, eyes grim. You're not gonna like this, Cap. Callahan wasn't just any pilot. He was special projects. Black level. They've been using him for deniable ops for years. And every time he did something that saved lives, they scrubbed it clean. It's not the first time he disappeared. Just the last. Warren stared at the screen, fury boiling in his chest. So he was their shadow. And when he finally stepped into the light, they smothered it. Mason leaned back, exhaling smoke from a cigarette. They'll come down on us hard if they know we're digging. But damn it, Cap, the man deserves better than vanishing into black ink. Warren rested his hands on the table, eyes locked on the cracked helmet. Then we keep digging. We don't stop until we drag his name into daylight. The others backed him without hesitation. Harlow offered to tap old contacts in medical units who might have crossed paths with Callahan. Mason kept tearing through encrypted systems. Even Ortiz, bedridden and weak, swore he'd help however he could. They weren't just a team anymore, they were a brotherhood bound by a ghost, by a salute in Freefall that had changed them forever. But Warren also knew the deeper they pushed, the greater the danger. Command didn't want Callahan remembered, and men who didn't want something remembered would do anything to keep it buried. He felt it in the stares of officers in the halls, in the clipped conversations that stopped when he walked by. They were already being watched. The question wasn't if command would move against them, but when. Warren's resolve only hardened. He looked at his men, tired but unbroken, and spoke with quiet certainty. They think we'll just fade out, forget. They don't understand. We carry him now. And we're not letting go. The warning came not as a threat but as a silence. Orders stopped arriving. Briefings excluded them. Other units trained, deployed, rotated out, but Warren's team remained frozen, confined to the base like ghosts haunting their own barracks. The absence of missions wasn't mercy, it was a leash. A quiet way to remind them they were being watched. Warren felt the leash tighten with every passing day. The men grew restless, tension leaking into their voices, their bodies. Mason paced like a caged predator, cracking his knuckles until the sound grated on everyone's nerves. Harlow buried himself in maintenance, stripping down weapons that didn't need stripping, oiling parts that already gleamed. Ortiz, still pale from his wounds, refused rest, instead sketching maps on scrap paper as though preparing for missions that would never come. The silence was suffocating. Then came the summons. Warren was called back into the colonel's office, escorted this time by 2 MPs who lingered by the door like shadows. The colonel didn't waste time. "Captain Warren, let's not dance around it. Your team is making inquiries into classified matters. That stops now." His tone was even, almost polite, but the steel beneath it was undeniable. Warren stood rigid, jaw clenched. "We're not asking for state secrets. We're asking for a man's name not to be erased." The colonel leaned forward, fingers steepled. "You think this is about honor? It's not. It's about control. Stories create questions. Questions create doubt. Doubt erodes the machine. And we can't afford erosion. Not now, not ever." He paused, eyes narrowing. "You and your men swore to serve the machine. Are you planning to forget that oath?" For a moment Warren said nothing. He wanted to roar, to flip the desk, to spit in the colonel's face. But instead he forced his voice calm. "We swore to serve our brothers first. Callahan earned that right. And I don't care how deep you bury him, we'll keep digging." The colonel's lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then consider this your final warning. Defy me again and you won't just lose your careers. You'll lose the men standing beside you." Dismissed. Warren walked out with the MPs at his back, the colonel's words echoing in his skull. Final warning. The message was clear: stop or they'd cut the team apart piece by piece. That night he gathered the men in the barracks. The helmets sat in the center of their table, lit by a single lamp, its surface catching faint glimmers of light. Warren's voice was low. "They've put us on ice. They know what we're doing. And they're not bluffing, they'll tear us down if we keep pushing." Silence settled heavy across the room. Mason broke it first. "So what? We're supposed to tuck tail? Pretend we didn't see him fall for us? Screw that, Cap. Let them come. I'd rather burn for the truth than rot in their silence." Ortiz coughed, wincing as pain lanced his side, but his voice was steady. "He bought us time. Bought me time. I'm not wasting it hiding under orders." Harlow looked from one to the other, then back to Warren. His tone was quiet, cautious. "Cap, if we push further, this stops being about Callahan. It becomes about us. They'll brand us insubordinate. Traitors even. You know what happens then." Warren nodded. "I know. That's why I'm asking, not ordering. You want out, I won't hold it against you. But if you stay, you do it knowing the cost." One by one the men met his eyes. And one by one they stayed. Mason slapped the table, grinning through clenched teeth. "Then let's give them something worth fearing." The decision bound them tighter than any oath. They began working in shadows, not as soldiers but as insurgents within their own house. Mason hacked deeper, using stolen clearance codes to peel back black files. Harlow funneled scraps of intel through old medical contacts who owed him favors. Ortiz, bedridden, pieced together timelines, cross-referencing the fragments they uncovered. Slowly the picture sharpened. Callahan had been everywhere. His name whispered across missions no one admitted happened. Somalia, Yemen, the Arctic Circle. He was the ghost in the system, the man who did the impossible, then disappeared. Commendations written, then erased. Reports filed, then redacted. Always saving others. Never saving himself. It wasn't incompetence that had buried him. It was design. The truth hit Warren hardest one sleepless night, staring at a half-redacted debrief Mason had pried loose. Callahan's last official commendation, stripped before filing, praised him for sacrificing his own aircraft to cover the retreat of a pinned unit. The wording was cold, bureaucratic, but Warren could see the reality between the lines. Callahan had been doing the same thing for years, giving himself away piece by piece so others could live. And every time, command buried it deeper. Not because he failed, but because he embarrassed them by succeeding where their machine couldn't. The rage simmered hotter. The salute in the valley was no accident. It was a culmination. A man who had given everything until there was nothing left, and still, even then, chose to give more. The more they uncovered, the closer the walls pressed in. Strange faces appeared around the base, men in unmarked uniforms who never spoke. Their barracks were searched while they trained. Harlow caught one of the MPs rifling through his locker, only to be brushed off with a cold smile. Mason's laptop vanished one afternoon, reappearing later with no explanation, though he could feel the fingerprints of intrusion all over it. The leash was no longer silent, it was tightening, choking. And yet none of it broke them. If anything, it drove them further. They began speaking Callahan's name aloud in the mess hall, in the gym, in whispered stories to other teams. The Angel 3 pilot, they'd say. The one who stood alone. At first the story spread like sparks, then like fire. New recruits leaned in with wide eyes. Older vets nodded slowly, remembering men they'd lost who deserved the same reverence. A legend was taking root beyond the reach of redacted files. Warren knew it couldn't last. Legends provoked attention. And when legends grew too loud, men like the colonel acted swiftly. The hammer would fall, it was only a question of when. But when it did, Warren wasn't afraid. He looked around at his brothers, scarred, tired, but unbowed, and felt the fire in his chest steady into steel. Callahan's ghost was with them now, not haunting but guiding. His salute wasn't just farewell, it was a torch passed. A command of its own. And Warren intended to carry it, no matter the cost. The hammer didn't fall with a roar. It fell with a whisper. At first it seemed like another routine morning. The hiss of the barracks radiator, the clatter of boots in the hallway, the faint smell of burned coffee from the mess. Warren almost believed the tension of the last weeks had been a fever dream. But then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door, deliberate, final. When he opened it, the corridor was full of MPs, helmets gleaming, rifles slung, expressions blank. Behind them stood a major Warren didn't recognize, clipboard in hand, eyes like stone. "Captain Warren," he said evenly. "You and your men are hereby relieved of duty, pending investigation into misconduct, unauthorized access of classified materials, and dissemination of disinformation. You will surrender weapons, electronics, and any restricted property immediately." The words landed like rounds in Warren's chest. "Disinformation?" he said, incredulous. Mason barked a laugh behind him. "They mean truth, Cap." The major ignored the jab. "You'll be escorted to holding. Cooperate and this ends clean. Resist?" He let the silence finish the sentence. The MPs moved in. Warren raised a hand. "Stand down," he told his men, though every instinct screamed to fight. Mason bristled, fists curling. Ortiz, still weak, struggled upright anyway. Harlow's jaw worked silently, his hand brushing the edge of the helmet on the table like a talisman. One by one they were disarmed, their gear bagged intact. The helmet, Callahan's helmet, was lifted by an MP with gloved hands, dropped into a crate without ceremony. Mason lunged before 2 rifles leveled at his chest froze him mid-stride. "That's not yours," he snarled, voice trembling with rage. "Enough," Warren snapped, forcing calm. He knew what this was. Intimidation, humiliation, the first step in erasing not just Callahan but all of them. They were marched out under the weight of 100 stares. Other soldiers lined the hallways, whispers trailing in their wake. Some eyes held confusion, others pity. A few burned with quiet understanding. But none spoke. The machine's silence was absolute. In the holding barracks, bare walls, no windows, cots bolted to the floor, they waited. Hours blurred into a day, then 2. Meals arrived in silence, trays shoved through a hatch. No news, no charges, no chance to speak. Just waiting. It was Mason who finally broke the quiet, pacing like a wolf in a too small cage. "This is it. They'll pin whatever they want on us. Court-martial, dishonorable discharge, hell, maybe worse. They're not letting us walk after the noise we made." Ortiz, pale but steady, sat hunched over, his voice soft. "Then maybe the noise was enough. People heard. The whispers won't die with us." Harlow shook his head, eyes shadowed. "Whispers fade, Ortiz. Files get rewritten, memories dulled. Without proof, without something that can't be erased, Callahan disappears again. And this time we go with him." Warren listened, silent. The colonel's words echoed in his mind. Stories create questions. Doubt erodes the machine. He realized then the truth was more dangerous than any bullet. That was why command feared it. That was why Callahan had been buried. On the 3rd night the door unlocked. Not MPs this time. A single man stepped inside, plain clothes, gray at the temples, carrying himself with the calm of someone who'd lived 1,000 battles no one would ever read about. He shut the door quietly behind him. "Captain Warren," he said, voice even. "I'm not here officially. Think of me as a courtesy visit. A chance to choose wisely before the machine decides for you." Warren's gut tightened. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been where you are. Someone who survived by learning when to stop." His gaze swept the room, lingering on the men, then the empty table where the helmet had once rested. "You've stirred embers better left cold." Callahan was useful, but he crossed lines. When men like that die, they die quietly. That's how it has to be. Mason spat on the floor. "Useful? He was a man. He saved lives." The visitor didn't flinch. "And that's why they can't let him live in memory. Heroes create doubt. Doubt breaks chains. You want to honor him? Forget him. Take your discharge quietly. Start over. Live. For a long time the room was silent. Then Warren stood, every muscle taut. You don't get it. He saluted us. Not you, not your machine. And I'll burn before I let that die. The man's eyes softened just for a flicker. Then you've chosen. He left without another word. The door locked behind him. The next morning the move came. MPs stormed the barracks at dawn, shouting orders, shackles ready. But Warren and his men were already waiting. Mason had unscrewed a cot frame, fashioning it into a makeshift bar. Harlow had rewired the room's light fixture into a sparking distraction. Ortiz, weak but fierce, had armed himself with nothing but willpower and a jagged shard of metal pried from the cot. The fight was short, brutal, desperate. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to break free. Warren drove his shoulder into the first MP through the door, Mason swinging the cot bar like a club. Sparks flared as Harlow ripped wires free, plunging the room into chaos. Ortiz lunged with his shard, buying seconds. Seconds were all they needed. They spilled into the corridor, alarms blaring. Soldiers swarmed, but confusion spread faster. Whispers of Callahan's name, of Warren's defiance, had already sown cracks. Some MPs hesitated. Some didn't aim to kill. In that hesitation Warren's team ran. Through barracks, across the motor pool into the night. Floodlights snapped on, sirens wailed, but still they ran. Not toward safety, there was none, but toward something greater. Toward the only thing left worth carrying. Because they weren't just running for themselves. They were carrying a salute. A legacy. A ghost that refused to be silenced. As the base roared awake behind them, Warren looked at his men, bleeding, limping, unbroken, and knew the machine would never truly own them again. They were already legends whether they lived another hour or not. And legends couldn't be erased. They didn't stop running until the mountains swallowed them. The base was a smoldering glow on the horizon, alarms still echoing faintly in the night air. Mason collapsed against a boulder, chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face. Ortiz slumped beside him, pale as moonlight, clutching his ribs. Harlow dropped to a crouch, hands trembling from the adrenaline crash. Warren stood last, scanning the darkness, every nerve still taut. They had escaped for now. But he knew the machine never let go. Cap, Mason panted, we need a plan. They'll hunt us. Dogs, drones, satellites, hell, the whole damn arsenal. They'll hunt the idea of us, Harlow murmured, voice low. Not just men. They'll try to erase what we carry. Warren nodded. He knew Harlow was right. Their fight wasn't about survival. It was about memory. About a salute in the dirt, a helmet battered and scarred, a man named Callahan who'd been written out of history. They couldn't win against the machine with guns or fists. But maybe, just maybe, they could win with truth. The mountains gave them cover, jagged ridges and narrow passes that slowed pursuit. For 3 days they moved like ghosts, scavenging what little they could. Mason snared rabbits. Ortiz boiled roots into bitter broth. Harlow patched Ortiz's wounds with strips of shirt and stubbornness. Warren carried them forward, always scanning the sky, always listening for the distant hum of drones. On the 4th night, as they huddled by a small, smokeless fire, Warren finally spoke the thought gnawing at him. We can't just run. They'll catch us sooner or later. But before they do, we can make sure Callahan's story lives. Somewhere they can't bury it. Mason frowned. You mean like leaking it? To who? Every channel's controlled. They'll twist it, bury it, call it enemy propaganda. Not if it spreads too fast to stop, Warren said. He pulled from his pocket the small recorder they'd smuggled out, the one Mason had hidden in the barracks ceiling before the raid. It held the helmet's testimony, Callahan's final words, and Warren's men swearing by them. Proof, not much but enough to spark fire. Ortiz's tired eyes lit faintly. If it reaches the right hands. Not just hands, Harlow cut in. Ears. 1,000,000 ears at once. Flood the underground nets. Pirate stations. Civilian bands. Once people hear, they'll question. Once they question. Doubt erodes the machine, Warren finished, repeating the colonel's warning. That night they set the plan. A relay tower jutted from the next ridge, an abandoned Cold War relic now rusting in the wind. But its core systems, if coaxed awake, could still amplify a broadcast far beyond line of sight. Enough to blanket cities, bases, even civilian homes with their signal. A voice the machine couldn't silence fast enough. It was suicide. They all knew it. But no one flinched. At dawn they moved. The tower loomed like a skeleton against the sky, its frame twisted but unbroken. They climbed its rusted ladder, wind tearing at their clothes, until they reached the control shack halfway up. Inside, dust and decay reigned, but the guts of the transmitter still hummed faintly when Harlow sparked the circuits alive. "Give me 10 minutes, Harlow said, sweat already beading his brow. "Then you've got one shot before the cavalry drops on us." Mason loaded the last of their scavenged rounds into his rifle, eyes hard. One shot's all Callahan ever needed. Ortiz leaned against the wall, pale but fierce. "Then let's make it count." Warren placed the recorder on the console. His hand lingered over it, the weight of everything pressing down. He looked at his men, broken, exhausted, unyielding, and felt something swell in his chest. Pride. Love. Resolve. He pressed play. The room filled with Callahan's voice. Raspy, tired but steady. "They'll try to write me out. Pretend I never stood beside you. But remember this, I was there. I bled for you. I saluted you. Not the brass, not the machine, you. And that means I live as long as you remember." Static crackled, then the transmitter's light flared green. The words leapt into the ether, racing outward across frequencies. Into radios, TVs, handhelds, old scanners and forgotten garages. Across the cities, the towns, the lonely highways. A ghost's voice rising from the grave. They layered their own oaths after his. Mason defiant. "He saved us and they buried him. Not anymore." Ortiz, voice weak but clear. "Heroes don't vanish. We carry him." Harlow, trembling but unbroken. "Callahan lives in every doubt you feel now. Question them." And finally Warren. "This is Captain Warren. We were there. We will not forget. Neither should you." The broadcast roared into the world. That was when the sky lit up. Gunships thundered over the ridge, searchlights stabbing the tower. Drones swarmed like hornets. The machine had arrived. "Time's up." Harlow shouted, sparks bursting from the console as the system overheated. "Keep it running?" Warren barked. "As long as it holds." Mason took position at the shattered window, rifle cracking against the storm. Drones spiraled down, some shattering, others pressing closer. Ortiz dragged himself upright, firing a sidearm with grim determination. Warren joined them, every shot a message: "You will not silence us." The first rocket slammed into the tower's base. Metal screamed. The structure shuddered, tilting. "We're falling," Mason yelled. "Then we fall loud." Warren roared back. Another rocket struck. The world tilted violently. Steel shrieked, bolts snapping. The tower began to collapse, tearing free from the earth. Inside, sparks flew, flames licking the console, but the recorder still played, Callahan's voice still echoing into the world. As the tower fell, Warren felt time slow. Mason firing until the last. Ortiz smiling faintly through blood. Harlow gripping the console like it was salvation. And Warren himself, standing tall, remembering the dirt, the helmet, the salute. The crash came like thunder. Steel crumpled, fire roared, and the night swallowed them. Across the land, radios crackled. Truckers on lonely highways heard a soldier's ghost. Families in quiet kitchens paused mid-bite, listening. Recruits in barracks froze as Callahan's voice cut through their drills. In city apartments, in farmhouses, in hidden basements, the truth spread. And in every ear it reached, doubt stirred. A question was born. The machine fought back, jamming signals, issuing denials, branding it all lies. But the words were already out, repeated, copied, whispered. A story too loud to bury. Weeks later, the official report declared Warren and his men dead in a failed desert ambush. No mention of Callahan. No mention of the broadcast. A clean file neatly closed. But among the ranks, among the people, whispers lived. Whispers of a salute. Of men who defied the machine. Of a name once erased. Callahan. And as long as the whispers lived, so did they all. The end.